Welcome to Test Prep Central. We're on Calculator Workshop 11, Piecewise Functions. Graph the piecewise function. We're on example 1. You'll notice this function f of x has 3 parts. And so we're going to graph basically what you're seeing on my screen here. We're going to graph this function. But before we begin, let me clear my memory. Okay, now you think piecewise functions, maybe this is an advanced algebra topic, but no, this is actually even just a algebra 1 topic because it really helps us understand functions, domain, range, all those fun things. So here we're going to go to the y equals screen in your calculator and type in the first piece of the function. So the first part of the function is negative x plus 3. So type that first. Use the negative below 3. Now here's where this is really different. Now next to that piece in the function, you will see x is less than 0. So what it's telling you is the domain for that piece of the graph. So only when x is less than 0 should this part of the graph appear. So the way we make this show up in the graph is we actually divide by the domain of the function, which is kind of weird, and I'll explain why this works after we get this all typed in, but we are going to divide this piece by its domain. So open parentheses first, and then put the letter x, and then you want to put less than 0. Well, the less than sign is under the test menu. So type second math, and you'll see the test menu. And number 5 is the less than symbol. Now we want x to be less than 0, so put a 0, and then close the parentheses. So inside the parentheses is the domain for just the first piece. Now let's go to y2, and let's type the second piece of the function. Okay, now the second piece is 4x. So put 4x, which is, these are all lines, by the way. And now we're going to divide this piece by its domain. Now, unfortunately, this calculator cannot read a compound inequality like the one that's written on the paper for this domain. So we have to write this statement a different way, and that is with 2 separate inequalities and the word and. We call this a conjunction. So go ahead and press divide and open your parentheses. And so what we'll do first, since it says 0 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 3, is we will go ahead and say x must be greater than or equal to 0, because that's what the first piece of that means. So we'll type x. To get the greater than or equal, type second math. And then greater than or equal is 4. So just press 4 and it'll put the symbol. Now I want it to be greater than or equal to 0, so put the 0. Next I need the word and so that's also under the test menu. So type second math, but it's not on this screen, it's actually under logic. So press right 1 to logic, and then the first thing on the list is and, so put and. Next you want x to be less than or equal to 3, so put another x. Go back to the test menu, second math. Less than or equal to is 6. And then put your 3. And then close your parentheses. So basically, the domain for this piece is greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 3. All right, let's move on to y3, which is the third piece of the graph. We're going to type the function 5 minus x, and then we're going to divide this piece. Whoops, almost forgot the divide. Divide this piece by its domain in parentheses. So you'll notice on that third piece the x is greater than 3. So start with x, go to your test menu, which is second math, greater than is 3, and then put another 3, close your parentheses, and that is the domain for that piece. Now to adjust the window One recommendation is to use the table, and I do want you to look at the table anyway, so let's go look at it for a second. If you go to second graph, you're going to notice a lot of error messages in this table. That's because everywhere that domain is true, then you will see an output for Y. But everywhere that domain is false, you will see the word error because it can't produce an answer. Now, why is that? I've kind of given you an explanation in your handout, but I'll just reiterate what that says. If you're using the test menu, what it will do is it will evaluate whatever expression you give it. And if that expression is true, then it will return a value of 1. If that expression is false, it will return a value of 0. Well, if you divide by 0, we know that's not possible. We can't divide by 0. So every time we're dividing by 0, we're getting in the table an error message. And what's happening is in the graph, we're not seeing the graph there either. It's not able to graph anything because there is nothing. They can't divide by the 0. However, if those statements are true, so if you go back to your statements here, if this statement is true, x is less than 0, then the graph will appear because it'll just replace this whole parentheses with a 1. Well, dividing by 1 doesn't really do anything. So that's why this strategy works. It's kind of a weird way to get your calculator to show what you want, but it works, so we're going to use it. Now let's look back at our table, which is second graph, and you'll notice that this y here is at 12. So we need our y maximum to go at least to 12 or beyond that. So when you press window, you can leave your x min, x max alone, your y min, but your y max, you need to bring that above the 12. So let's make that 15. And it could be 13. It doesn't matter as long as it's more than 12. All right, when you type graph, you will see your graph. Now, I have grid lines turned on your handout, so let's do this. Let's go to second zoom and turn the grid lines on. The third row at the end, you will highlight grid line and type enter, and then your grid lines will show up. So now it looks like the one in your handout. So that's how you graph piecewise. It's not very challenging once you get the hang of it, and you do, I guess, finding that test menu and getting those symbols in there, that's probably the one thing you have to practice a lot to learn, but once you do, it's actually pretty easy. All right, let's move on to example 2. We're going to graph the function and then evaluate the function using the graph. So it says graph and evaluate g of -2, g of 0, and g of 4. All right, so let's go back into y equals. You will notice that all the ranges, all the domains for these 3 pieces are the same, but just because they're the same, I don't want to just write over. I'm going to go ahead and retype all this because I want to practice. Now, maybe the next time we'll not do it this way, but I do want to type it all over at least one more time for practice. So here we have the function negative absolute value of the quantity x plus 4. So let's put the negative that's under 3. The absolute value symbols are math, num, 1. Inside put your x plus 4. Okay, and then go to the right with your right arrow to get outside your absolute value, and then divide that by the domain for that piece. So the domain is x is less than 0. So let's type x, and then we'll type second math, less than is 5, and then put your 0. Close your parentheses. Now let's go to y2. The second piece is just a 4. So in case you don't remember, that's just a horizontal line. Let's put divide and open parentheses. Now this cannot be typed the way that it's written on the paper. The way that it was written, remember, is a compound inequality, and the calculator cannot read that. So we have to separate into 2 statements with the word and. So we're going to say, instead of 0 is less than or equal to x, we're going to say x is greater than or equal to 0. So we'll put x, and then greater than or equal to is second math 4, and then 0. The word and is in the same menu, second math, but it's under logic. So go right one to logic and then type 1. And then X. And then you're going to put less than or equal to, so that's second math, and 6. Don't close yet. We need our 3, and then close the parentheses. All right, so X is between the 0 and the 3, including the 0 and the 3. So let's move to Y3. The third piece of the graph starts with -2. Be sure not to use the minus sign. Some of you may have seen the error message, but it won't work with the minus sign. It has to be the negative that's below your 3. Open parentheses, X minus 3, close parentheses, and squared. Okay, now we want this piece to be greater than 3. So I'm going to go divide, and we're going to open parentheses, and we're going to say X, and we're going to go to alpha, not alpha, my bad, second math. Now greater than or equal to is 4, so choose 4. And then we want to put a 3, and so we will close our parentheses. All right, so there we have our 3 pieces, and each piece is divided by its respective domain. Now the table, let's go look. Well, I don't know if you've looked at the table yet, but let's look at it together. So if you go to the table, these numbers are all really small. It does go to -8 here. So, but this is -5. -5 to 5 looks good. So I would say let's just go ahead and use the window that's on your handout. I did go -5 to 5 for both. Maybe that -8 would have been good, but we're good. All right, so the Y min is -5. Now let's do +5, and then also I'm using a scale of 1 for both of these. The window, if you'll do zoom, 0 works as well, I think, on this one, but I'm going to go ahead and hit graph and see what this looks like. All right. Now here's something new. We're going to evaluate this function at -2. So what you do is type trace -2, and it'll automatically go to the first piece. Well, it just so happens, and you can actually see the domain here, that this value is below 0. So that should be on the first piece. It is in the correct spot. The second point is G of 0. So type trace 0 enter or just 0 enter. Now the problem with that is 0 enter gives you nothing because it's still on the first piece, and that is not in that domain of that piece. This 0 should be in the second piece because it says 0 is less than or equal to X is less than or equal to 3. So to get to the second piece, let's do down arrow, and it's still on the 0. You can see that here, and now you can see the Y value of 4 in the second piece. So that's how we get to the second piece of the graph. And then the third one we want is G of 4. So let's type G of 4 enter. And again, it is not showing up because 4 is not in that piece. So let's go to the next piece by typing down arrow, and you'll see that it's off a little bit. So just type 4 again, and it'll get right on the number. That happens a lot when you go from one piece to another in these types of problems. So just press the number again and enter, and it'll recalibrate on the new function if it's off a little bit. So now do you see the Y coordinate there, -2, is the value of the function at the 4. So using the left arrows and the right arrows, you can move from left to right on one function. Using the up and the down arrows, you can move from one function to a different function. And then hitting trace a number, enter, will put the Y value at whatever function you're on. It'll show the Y value there. If there is no Y value there, it's showing you you're outside the domain for that piece. You need to get onto another piece. All right, let's move on to example number 3. So in this problem, let's do something a little bit different. Instead of retyping the whole thing, Notice the ranges, the domains are the same for each piece again. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to hit the delete button and delete all of this. And then if you type second delete, that's called insert. If you type that, you can just type in the function right in front of that domain. So I've got 2 raised to the x plus 2 power. So I'm just going to put that in like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the second row. Instead of deleting that or clearing it, I'm going to delete just the 4 and type second delete, which is insert, and then I can just type in that second piece. So negative x plus 1. This is a really good skill to know so that you don't have to continually retype an entire problem over if you've made one small error. Remember, second delete allows you to insert something into something that's already there. All right, so I've got negative x plus 1 for my second piece. It has the same domain, so we're not changing that. Let's go to the third row. Now in the third row, I've got 3 halves. Well, let's see. If I hit delete and I do alpha y equals enter, it's going to put my fraction there. So I'll put the 3 on the top, the 2 underneath, and I still have a 2 here, so I'll hit delete and remove that. Inside the parentheses, I still have an x minus 3, and I still have a power of 2, so all of that's going to remain the same. All right, so we have all of our function all of our function typed in. To do our graph, you'll notice I'm using the same window that we used in the last problem, so we'll just go ahead and type graph to look at this. So there's piece 1, piece 2, piece 3. Now we can evaluate on this window. In fact, at the end, if you want to go back and maybe when I'm done, try evaluating at these values that we're going to do in a moment on the home screen, this would be good practice to use your trace button and find those values. But I want to show you another way to get values from a function, a piecewise function. So let's type second mode to clear, and let's evaluate h of negative 2. Well, you have to know, if you're finding h of negative 2, that negative 2 is in the first part of the graph, so it's in the first piece. So you're going to type variables, y variables, 1, 1 for the first piece, and then you're going to put inside your parentheses the value negative 2. Close your parentheses and type enter, and it will give you the value of y at that point. The second number is 0, and 0 is in the second piece. So you're going to do the same thing as you did before, but we're not going to choose y1, we're going to choose y2. So variables, y variables, 1, 2. And then in that piece, put in a 0. Now type enter. And by the way, if you mess up and it accidentally pick the wrong piece, it's going to return the word error. So you will know that you picked the wrong piece, and you will need to look again at the domain for that piece to evaluate your function. All right, this last number is a 4. So evaluate h of 4. So we're going to input a 4 into the third piece. So type variables, y variables, 1, 3. And then in parentheses, we're going to put the value 4. This is like your x. And then it's going to output your y, or your output. And so I've got all of those answers written out for you at the bottom of the page. Again, I would encourage you maybe use this example here for practice, and you can actually go back and evaluate that graph by typing graph, trace, and then type in these x values to see if you can get these same y values when you use the graph. All right, helpful hints. Don't forget you can clear your memory and start over, but in these particular problems you might want to hang on to your domains and kind of reuse them. I have given you the same domains in your exercises, but I would suggest at least one more time to delete everything and type it in again for practice. A great way to master your calculator is to work problems, do a lot of practice. So until we meet again, practice, practice, practice.